they are monetizing chronic disease, and there is no incentive to prevent or obstruct you progressing into a chronic disease because there is so much money being made off prescription medicines.
You're listening to Be Well by Kelly LeVeque. Brigham Buhler, I have been stalking you on the internet over the last couple months, and I love, first of all, everything that you are sharing in regards to how broken the healthcare system is, but just your personal journey as well. And you're offering all of you have a compounding pharmacies. You have ways to well. You have all these ways for people to understand how to optimize their health, feel their best, and you're really offering solutions that I think aren't available to most Americans across the country. And I'm so grateful for your time and for the passion behind all of the work that you do. So thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you for having me. And it's been a surreal journey. It has been wild. I mean, 5 years ago, I was trying to ring the bell on everything that was happening in our healthcare institutions and how corporately captured and broken they were. And if it wasn't for the fate of going on Rogan, it kind of created honestly, a tsunami that took over and led to the opportunity to meet Bobby Kennedy and some of these politicians that have led to the Senate testimony and all the things that have transpired over the last few years. And it all just started with trying to expose the corruption and do my best to tell the truth about what I saw.
Right.
And before we got on the air, you and I were talking about, we have similar paths, which is so interesting that you came from pharma and med device and have been in the belly of the beast and seen probably a lot of the same stuff I've seen.
I have. And I want to start from the beginning because I think our story, a lot of the times what we learn kind of opens our eyes to how we can make change in the world. And so let's start with your story. What happened in your early 20s? You got your first job. What did it look like? What were you doing? What was the career path?
I was at University of Houston, and I was in a sales program, and I was actually interning at Compaq Computers, which became Hewlett Packard.
Yeah.
And so I thought I was going to go be a industry server salesperson and go that path. And pharmaceutical companies recruited out of my sales program. And at the time, that was the pinnacle of sales. This is 24 years ago now. So, forever ago.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at that in college, I thought a company car, an expense account.
I hear you.
I'm telling people about life-saving medications that can impact their lives and change the world. And at the time, I went to go work for Eli Lilly, which then was literally their tagline was the most ethical of the pharmaceutical companies. They were admired as the most ethical of all the big pharma. And then getting into that space for a little bit, I did it for, 3.5 years.
Okay.
And so for the first couple of years, it was honestly fun.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest, it was a blast because I launched Cialis, which was the Viagra competitor. And it was a compound that everyone was excited about, that was revolutionary, new to the market, not no real major side effect profile.
Yeah.
Tons of upside. Everyone,
changing lives.
Yeah, people loved it. And so it was a fun medication.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like I was out selling toe fungus. That's
Right.
my the toe fungus medication. So
Right.
it was like being a rock star.
Yeah.
It was very interesting. Getting to launch that drug was a lot of fun. And it wasn't until after maybe 2 years that I started to see the dark side, where I got moved to Houston, Texas, where I was in the Woodlands, and I was being given antidepressants, SSRIs, antipsychotics, bipolar medicines. And that's where it starts getting a lot more complex. And, these are really crucial medications, but also you begin to look at the studies and the data and go, man, a lot of this just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense.
Is that when you first had the inclination that maybe this wasn't the right path for you? And what were you learning along the way then when you were going in and speaking to the physicians about the studies that you had that backed your products and getting them to prescribe it for their patients?
Yeah.
How did it start to feel for you? And what?
It's funny because you said it. You said it before we went on the air. You start feeling like a glorified caterer. It was less about what you talk about and whether you brought beef fajitas from Papacitos or a different restaurant that day.
Yeah.
And the staff only cared about what lunch you brought, not what your product was. And then whoever brought the best lunch and worked the most with that staff inevitably ends up getting more business. It's just, human nature. I hate to say that. I don't want to paint it as so corrupt, but it is, there's definitely a lot of cross-pollination and like misaligned interests.
Oh, yeah.
And it becomes down to a lot of it's a relationship thing. You know, clinicians are going to use products of the people that they trust and know. And so you may have an inferior product, but if you build a better relationship, that product may get preferential treatment in a practice. And so that was an interesting piece of the puzzle to see.
Right. I mean, I remember learning from some of the reps in my first job with J&J that some of the tenured reps who'd been there a long time would tell me, oh, we used to get to go golfing. We used to take them, we do like a sunset cruise in Newport Beach. And now we can't do that anymore. And we just have to do lunches. And it is, you're like you're taking them to big, nice dinners, and they want, they're immediately taking the menu and ordering the most expensive wines. And, I was like 21, 22 years old at the time with like 50-year-old physicians, like just, it's cringe a little bit,
That was my first experience too. I was 21 and I had a $25,000 a month expense account.
Yeah.
Use it or lose it, take guys to dinner, build relationships. So I was taking these staffs, these nurses, all of them to dinner. And you start out naive, right, in your early 20s, and you think, I'm going to make a difference in the world. And you begin to realize that it's a big machine, and that machine has incentives that are different than what you thought, right? It's not about driving patient outcomes, helping people. Mm-hmm. It is about driving quarterly earnings and quarterly profits, and the pressure is immense, and the goals and the initiatives and the growth trajectories are immense. Mm-hmm. And you start feeling like a glorified caterer and like you're not really making an impact. And so that's when I started to look to go into med device, and I had the opportunity to jump out of the pot and into the fire with med device. And it was different. Med device was I really did feel like I was making a difference in that the hospitals needed you.
Yeah, the physicians listen. They're like, I'm going to put a knee in. I need you to tell me how to do this because it just came off the line.
Yes. And it was like the Wild West. It was such a different world and perspective. And you're up at 4 a.m. and you're working long days and long hours, and you're running around to make sure all your sets are at the hospitals, and you're doing all these things to try and make sure that day goes well for that surgeon or that staff, and that surgical procedure goes well. Mm-hmm. And so you do feel like you're valued and you're working hard. Yeah. But even in being in that space, it gave me a line of sight into, a lot of the challenges of the system. And it's like every job I took, I got a little bit more of a sneak peek, and then a little bit more of a sneak peek. And then as I was trying to build out my own pharmacy and work within the insurance framework, is where I finally put all the puzzle pieces together and begin to go, oh, now I'm understanding how, why, and where we got to this point. And it all just started to make sense. So,
well, it's interesting because you started to get into pharmacies because of a personal journey and a tragedy with your brother. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the equivalent to a 747 jet worth of people are dying every day because of opioids to this day. And unfortunately, my brother was caught up in that opioid crisis, and he passed away at 27 years old. And it was a big event to our family, obviously, and really sent shockwaves. And at the time, I was already out educating clinicians on the importance of non-abusive, non-addictive alternatives. And I had built a pharmacy, and it was just jarring experience of like, I'm sitting here trying to build a life raft, and at the same time, I lose my own brother to this entire sector of like corruption. And looking at that, like, you would bill the insurance and try and get them to approve a non-addictive, non-abusive pain cream, and they would push patients back to an opioid. And at the time, I didn't understand why. Now, even the data's come out, 30% of the revenue generated from opioids went to the insurance companies. And so they've never stood trial or indictment or anything for their role and their implicit involvement in the opioid crisis. But the facts are the facts. Roughly about 30% of the profitability of an opioid was made by the insurance companies themselves.
And many people are addicted, so they get on it, they stay on it, they find new physicians that will write them these pain medications. and it's like a chronic disease prescription.
Yeah.
Because it becomes years of their life.
And originally, and I broke this down, I'm sure you've had people break it down too, though, when the Sackler family realized their patent was running up on
we got to start over. Not my community doesn't know this.
Okay.
So give us
give
us the meat and potatoes around what it looks like to have a patent on a drug, what pharmaceutical companies can do to extend that patent. It's
a little walk down history lane, because it's pretty mind-boggling. In New York City, a family launched Valium into the marketplace. And I think it was the 70s, and began to market Valium don't just drink a vodka, pop a Valium. A little bit stressed, take a Valium. Calm her nerves. And there were ads put out in newspapers telling women to take Valium. That was the Sackler family. This Sackler family made an insane amount of money perpetuating and creating the Valium crisis of the 70s. They stood against congressional hearings where they got into a bunch of trouble. They ended up getting off scot-free with some fines. Jump forward, roughly 30 years later, and they have now hydrocodone in a cotton system. So they have a patent on the delivery mechanism, and all it is it layers the opioid so that you don't get all the opioid at once.
Extended release.
And so their cotton system used hydrocodone. Hydrocodone was the system was going to come off patent. And so, like what so many pharmaceutical companies do, you either lose that revenue stream to generics, or you file for a new indication or a new patent. Well, to do that, you either need to change the compound and launch something new, or you need to find a new indication. So in this instance, they went the pathway of, we'll just change the opioid. They found Oxy. The problem with Oxy is it's 8 to 10 times more addictive than hydrocodone. And their message to the FDA was, but we have this amazing delivery system and it won't be abusive. Even though it's 8 to 10 times more addictive, it won't get addictive and it won't become abusive because of our amazing delivery system. But what they didn't tell anyone is all you had to do is grind up the pill to circumvent the issue.
Yeah.
And so these people who get addicted and then develop immunity and then have breakthrough pain because the medicine's not giving them the relief it was before, end up upping their dosage and upping their dosage and upping their dosage. And then they have addictive behaviors where they end up grinding up the pills and oftentimes taking them in unorthodox ways to try and get that same relief that they were getting originally. And it created the opioid crisis. And where it gets even scarier is you say, how did this product get into the market? And there were so many failed safety nets and checks and balances. And one of those was the FDA utterly failed on this one. The head of the FDA at the time met the Sackler family in a hotel room for 2 weeks.
Already shady.
To help draft the verbiage that they submitted to the FDA to get their approval and their indication. And he gave them the goose that laid the golden egg. They put in the label, less likely to be abusive. Even though there was no evidence that it was less likely, even though the opioid was 8 times more potent than the previous opioid that was in the compound, and they pushed it into the marketplace, and like a nuclear bomb, it went off. And overnight, you had, millions of Americans addicted to opioids, and you had the insurance companies and pain clinics and everyone profiteering off of an entire market boom, an entire sector that candidly has cost millions and millions of lives, hundreds of millions of dollars in damage, and we're still suffering the consequences. That's why we're facing a fentanyl crisis right now. Fentanyl is, the new drug that's killing everyone, and it was perpetuated and started by the opioid crisis.
I'm going to back up the bus because it's scary as a parent. I'll just say, I was having this conversation with my sister about where you live and where your kids go to school because we grew up in Southern California. There's a beach culture. There's like a grungy surf culture. You see drugs growing up. And my mom saw drugs growing up in Los Angeles. And I'm like, how do I put my kids in a bubble, put them on a ranch somewhere and never have this? I'm petrified of that because you see that addiction, and like addiction runs in my family. My grandmother died of an alcohol overdose and was definitely using pills like Valium. You know, my dad was drinking when I was little, and at 5 years old has been stone cold sober since. I grew up in a house where like no drinking even really happened, and I'm so grateful for that. Like it's something that I'm thinking a lot about with my kids. But when you think about these really highly addictive products, it's like one taste of them for some people, and it's like the addiction is like wildfire. Like what, like when you think about the opioid crisis and the fentanyl crisis and what you've gone through with your brother, which I have so much empathy for you, and I like can't imagine losing a sibling. I'm so sorry for that. Like, how do we fix it? Like, how do we button down this issue? And like, is it doctor education? Is it the reimbursement problem? Like, at what point is it going to stop? You know?
No, I think that's a good question. And I think it's all of it. I legitimately think it's all of it. If, again, I could systematically break down for you where the checks and balances failed. The first failure was that they allowed these highly addictive opioids into the marketplace. The second failure was that the FDA not only allowed it, but misled the American public on how addictive and abusive these compounds could be.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're in the marketplace. The next safety net is the clinicians and the doctors being given the power and the autonomy to make decisions alongside a patient that are best for the patient and the patient's health, not what's best for the insurance pocketbook and quarterly earnings. And so that failure happened because there was pharmacogenetic tests, which is a simple cheek swab. And through that test, we could tell if you're a slow, fast, or moderate metabolizer. We could tell if you had a propensity to become addicted. We could tell if you're part of the 20-something% of people that can't even process an opioid. All of that gives us a better blueprint to success. Insurance companies took it away and said, we're not going to cover it.
Wow.
The second was the safety net of a toxicology screen, right? If you're going to prescribe an opioid, even during Obama's administration, his opioid abuse committee had guidelines. And those guidelines were you should pharmacogenetic test anyone going on more than 30 days of opioids. That was out the window. You should toxicology screen anyone to make sure that they're not abusing any other drugs, that they don't have any abusive behaviors, and that they're not diverting the medication. That was removed by the insurance companies. They said, we're not going to cover the toxicology screen. Then you go, okay, well, now we have an alternative in non-abusive, non-addictive pain creams as an alternative for at least orthopedic and neck and back injuries. You know, a large percentage of these patients, we could avoid the opioid completely. Insurance doesn't cover that, so that goes away. So the three safety nets were eliminated by the insurance companies, and then all those patients were put back on opioids. And so, again, and you go, well, why? And then when you see over and over again, and what I'll break down with the pharmacy benefit managers and the whole insurance model is they are monetizing chronic disease, and there is no incentive to prevent or obstruct you progressing into a chronic disease because there is so much money being made off prescription medicines. So the average American's on 4 or more prescription drugs. Out of those prescription drugs, a big chunk of the profitability is going to and being held by the insurance companies themselves, not just big pharma. And so I broke this down on some other parts. The 5 big insurance companies are 4 times the revenue of the 5 biggest pharmaceutical companies.
Together.
So the 5 big insurance companies are 4x the revenue of the 5 biggest pharmaceutical companies.
Wow.
And they've never made a product.
Okay, let's break down the flow of money and incentives that everyone's getting in sort of the funnel from the pharmacist to insurance to the pharmaceutical company, and how that, because you just said it, it is a money-making machine.
Yeah.
None of the people no puzzle piece is going to want to give up their share of this cash flow.
No.
How does it go?
Yeah.
How are decisions being made from a pharmacy level to an insurance company level to all the way to the
And I'll walk it all the way back to the creation of a molecule.
Okay.
Because this is where this gets mind-boggling. I was explaining this to some Texas senators at dinner earlier this week.
Yeah.
Because they were wanting to understand how do these patents work? So go all the way back to the NIH, right? The National Institute for Health, where these drugs are being developed and these compounds and these unique molecules. So an example I can use is the GLP weight loss drugs.
Yeah. Ozempic.
These drugs were funded by taxpayer dollars, created by taxpayer dollars, studied by taxpayer dollars, brought to a point where they become a marketable product.
Okay.
All funded by our money. Then the NIH licenses the peptide or the compound to a big pharmaceutical company for royalty rights, which are pennies on the dollar.
Right.
And it was the same thing with all the COVID vaccines. Like we used our taxpayer dollars to innovate and create, for better or worse, a compound that then is brought to the market and monetized by a pharmaceutical company, captured by a pharmaceutical company, but we fit the bill for all the innovation and development. All Big Pharma did was take it once it's been vetted and run it through the FDA approval process and bring it to market and market it. So then you think, okay, well, now the drug comes to market. No, because the next phase is 90+% of Americans are controlled by their insurance company on what drugs and medications they get. So Big Pharma then goes and negotiates with your big insurance company. And so I have to take a little walk down history lane again. In the 80s, the government saw this problem coming and they said prescription drugs, innovation, all of it is happening so quickly. We can't keep up. We need an advocate for the people. Okay. We need somebody to negotiate down the cost of prescription drug care, to fight Big Pharma, to take a stand and to help make medications affordable for the average American, for the average taxpayer. I mean, after all, we're paying for the innovation with our taxpayer dollars via the NIH and HHS. And so let's negotiate better rates and make sure we protect our citizens. Within a decade, basically, all of these pharmacy benefit managers, which were our allies driving down the cost of prescription drug care, got corporately captured by the big five insurance companies. So they came in and they gobbled up what they're calling the middlemen. And rather than negotiating down the cost of prescription drugs, they began to negotiate up.
And cut themselves a piece.
The cut, yes.
Wow.
And you go, why would they negotiate the rates up? They would say, instead of charging me $150 for insulin, charge me $300, and then give me a rebate of $150 to my middleman pharmacy benefit manager company. And so a real world example, United Healthcare did over $360 billion in revenue last year. Almost 60% of their revenue came from the pharmacy benefit manager. So think about that. A huge chunk of their revenue is coming from monetizing chronic disease. So now you have a system that has lost its checks and balances, right? All of these people who work at the NIH or the FDA go to work for industry. 10 out of the last 11 heads of the FDA went to go work for industry, including the head of the FDA that pushed the opioid from Sacklers into the marketplace, OxyContin. Guess who that FDA head went to work for within 18 months? The Sackler family. Yeah. The very company that put him in a hotel room and negotiated with this individual to bring this drug to market. He goes to work for the bad guys within 18 months. And this revolving door is a chronic issue in the system. And it's leading to a lot of what we're seeing. And so it candidly perpetuates this chronic disease crisis. And we sit here and go, how are 1.7 million Americans dying a year of chronic disease? Because there is no incentive for big pharma, big insurance, or any of these institutions to prevent chronic disease. They're monetizing chronic disease. So there's more money in putting you on insulin and metformin and diabetes medication than there is in preventing the diabetes from occurring in the first place.
Wow. I mean, the corruption it's been pretty crazy lately just to see what's happening. When you think about, okay, let's use the example, it's $300 for this medication and $150 of it's going to the pharmacy manager, pharmacy benefit manager. And then you have a list like, I'm Blue Cross Blue Shield. I have my insurance card. I go, if I ever need a prescription and I go to CVS, they're like, it's covered or it's not covered. Well, how do you know what ends up on that list? I mean, I can go ahead and make a guess that they're going to pick a product where they make $150 on versus $50.
So they tier price. This is another one of the dirty secrets. The insurance companies create tier pricing based off who gives them the biggest rebate, not off what drug is the most efficacious. And so a tier 1 drug will have preferential treatment and they'll steer you towards the tier 1 drug because they have negotiated a backdoor rebate that is bigger than other drugs. right? And then they discourage the consumer behavior because if you have a tier 3 drug, your contract may read that you have a 50% copay on that drug.
Yeah.
So then you're going, well, do I want to pay half the cost of the drug? And here's the other problem. They get to set the retail price on the drug. So there's been a bunch of viral clips going out in the last few weeks in the surgical market where people are like getting MRIs and they get a bill for $3,000 is their out-of-pocket expense on an MRI.
Yeah.
Then they call the MRI center and say, if I pay cash, what's the MRI? Oh, it's $700.
Yeah.
Well, then why is my insurance company billing me $3,500?
Right.
Right? Delay, deny, depose is what that kid Luigi put on the bullets.
Yeah.
What he did was terrible. It was tragic. It was disgusting. I'm in no way, shape, or form condoning any of the behavior. But if you look at what the info behind what he was trying to say, there is some truth and validity to the level of corruption and collusion that would push somebody to a breaking point like what that kid experienced. And that's why I think you saw this, what a lot of people are calling like repulsive behavior about the support of what happened. You know, I think people are pissed and they're rightfully frustrated with a system that has let them down. You're spending a huge chunk of your paycheck to have insurance coverage with the hope of them protecting and helping you down the road when you need it. That's just not what happens. They push you to prescription drugs. They monetize and mark up those prescription drugs, right? So let's just use a drug that's like off generics, and I've used this before, like metformin.
Right.
You know, metformin cost me as a pharmacy owner about like $2 for a month prescription. I would charge you $4. You come in, I swipe your insurance card, and it's Blue Cross Blue Shield. It's going to tell me to charge you $10 copay. I don't get to keep that additional $8. That goes back to the PBM. The middleman gets to hold that. And so you multiply that times any generic drug, any cost-effective drug, you're overpaying for the drug that's a generic. Then you're paying a fake price for the other drugs. Then drugs that aren't in tier 1, that may be tier 2 or 3, you may have a bigger out-of-pocket copay or deductible that oftentimes is more expensive than the drug itself. And so you're not really getting anything from the insurance companies. As far as prescription drug care goes, oftentimes you're paying more than you would if you paid cash.
It's so frustrating because insurance, like, I mean, I'm sure you were taught this as a kid. Like, I'm a business owner, I'm an entrepreneur. I have, you know, homeowners insurance and fire insurance for Southern California. I have health insurance. I just, you know, we've hired employees. I have young girls that work for me who can't be on their parents' insurance that I'm now, you know, giving them health insurance. I have like insurance for my supplements. I have insurance for social media coverage. Like I have insured every piece of my life because they make you so scared that if you don't have insurance, that you're going to go bankrupt and that your, you know, everything that you've built and worked for is going to be taken from you. And that's like the fear of being an entrepreneur. That's the fear of being a parent. Like what happens. You know, my first son was sent to the NICU for like basically 2 weeks, and it was $250,000 bill to my insurance company from CHLA. And it's like, I didn't have to pay that because I had insurance, but that right there would have been like years and years and years of saving for the down payment on our first home, you know? Like that's so scary. Like, but knowing how much corruption is in all of this, like all of the insurance tiers and the pharmacies, like, what can Americans do? What can we do with legislation? What can we do as like to take our power back and like be prepared without like watching all of our money be lit on fire?
I know. Well, I tell people you have to start viewing your health insurance like car insurance.
Yeah.
It's there if you wreck the car.
Yeah.
It's
there
not
for
going,
the NICU stay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not going to rotate the tires, change the oil, maintain the vehicle.
Yeah.
You're going to have to take sovereignty and accountability over your health, and you're going to have to drive your own journey.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Callie Means and I have talked about in depth is if the government would increase HSA accounts, give people accessibility to their money tax-free to utilize for healthcare, and if we would incentivize preventative, predictive medicine, personalized medicine, and reward people for healthy behaviors, healthy lifestyle, healthy choices, and make it a tax incentive and a benefit, like the carrot and the stick, give a reward system to incentivize healthy behavior.
Yeah.
You're not going to get that in the insurance model because there's so much money being made off of you being on a medicine. And so as you break it down, like where people, I want to follow through just so people can totally understand. You go, okay, well, hold on. Let's just use a drug that's insulin, $150. They're charging $300. Then they pass the bill from the middleman to the main parent company. Let's just call it Blue Cross Blue Shield. Blue Cross Blue Shield says we paid $300 a month for your insulin, but they didn't. They got a $150 rebate, right? So it's inflated by $150. They then, at the end of that 36 months, say we spent $3,600 on Joe Bob's insulin. You, the employer, are going to have an increase in your copay, your deductible, your out-of-pocket expense, and your employee health plans, because we're spending all this money, but they never really spent the money. So it allows them to essentially artificially inflate their cost while holding a lot of the profits over at a separate company. And that's how I say the margins are made in the mystery. When people say healthcare is so confusing, why don't I just know the price of something? That's all by design. That's how the insurance companies have built it. And oftentimes the hospital or surgery center or MRI center is attempting to bill within that insurance contract's framework and trying to get reimbursed. They don't want to go after the patient, but they're forced to. Like they're essentially a subprime mortgage lender, and they don't want to be. And I say that because, like, if let's say you move from the prescription medicine that they're making money on, and now let's say you have a spine injury like that kid Luigi and you need a spine surgery. Typically, that's like a $10,000 out-of-pocket expense. That's your copay. Well, the insurance companies don't collect the copay. They leave you, the hospital or the MRI center or the surgery center, on the hook to have to go after the copay. And that's just another way to bully and intimidate the market. Because if I'm a hospital and I know that less than 20% of people are actually going to pay their copay, I'm chasing you down, begging you to pay your copay, but you don't have the $10,000. They oftentimes do the surgery anyway
to get the insurance
the insurance money. But then the problem with that is when you get crossways with the insurance companies, or they short pay you, which they do all the time, they'll pay you a third of billed charges, and they take 60 to 90 days to pay you. So you're begging these insurance companies as a hospital maybe 6, 7, 8 months to get paid a percentage of what you billed them. And then if you litigate against them, they'll say, well, look, he didn't collect, or they didn't collect their copays or deductibles. They only collected 20%. We think they violated their contract. And so it's this whole Ponzi scheme to put the patient on the hook and intimidate the patient from ever having a surgery, because they don't make money off the surgery. They make money off the prescription drugs. And then you go, well, what about, the chronic diseases that lead to surgeries? If I'm an executive at an insurance company, I know that the average American's going to switch jobs every 24 months. And that means they become another insurance company's problem. And so I'm not worried about 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road. I am worried about hitting quarterly earnings and quarterly profits. And I know that these prescription drugs will get me there. And then I know if I just delay, deny, or depose the ability to have a surgery, then I can maximize my quarterly revenues. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. They just kick the can. They put you on the prescription medication. They say you're not eligible for this surgery. Surgery is not going to make me money. And then I can think, I don't know if you've ever received, I don't want to say a collections letter, but you get the bill from the hospital, and then you get the second bill from the hospital. And I feel like the insurance stuff is so hard. I'll get something from Blue Cross Blue Shield and it'll be this is not a bill, but it's 40 pages long. And I'm like, what is it then? Why am I getting this from you? Why am I not just getting it from the physician or the doctor that I worked with? And it is, as a patient, it's so scary, especially a business owner, an entrepreneur, a parent. I'm you got to keep your credit in check. You got to make sure everything is paid. And so you're the person feeling intimidated and scared and figuring out how to get something paid.
It's wild you're saying that, because this is an example. An EOB is an explanation of benefits. Okay, and the insurance companies love to blow those up and make them look huge to scare, bully, and intimidate patients and make you go, I don't want to go to the hospital ever again. I don't want to ever ride in an ambulance again. It is not the ambulance trying to screw over a person. What happens, and this happens all the time, let's say you were to call and negotiate for an ambulance ride, it's probably $700. Let's just make a real world example would be the MRI. An MRI is going to be under $700. Okay. if you run it in an insurance model, depending on the insurance plan, the reimbursement rate, all of it, they may bill that insurance $3,000, but they never get paid the $3,000 because the insurance will short pay or not pay the full amount. And so oftentimes these MRI centers may have like an algorithm that says we bill $3,000 to get paid the $700. Right? And that's how they get it. So they have to inflate their bill master to get the $700 that they should have gotten in the first place. But then with the way the insurance company makes it hard on them and your doctor is they send you an EOB to intimidate you and make you think you're on the hook for the $3,000. And they try and make it look like, look at what this MRI center did. They billed us $3,000. It wasn't them. It was the insurance company all along. If they would have just agreed to and paid the rate that's a fair market rate and not done this shell game, patients would have accessibility to care. And where I'm going with this is you will oftentimes find if you call an MRI center or a hospital and said, can you tell me the cash price? I don't have insurance. You are going to find an exorbitant amount of the time it is cheaper than if you use insurance, especially with blood work. That's one of the challenges with blood work. Even me, my personal journey, trying to get answers. I went to a primary care. Primary care finally gets me into a urologist because I couldn't go to a urologist without going to a primary care first and having a referral.
So annoying.
It took me like 9 months to get in. I finally get in. The urologist pulls comprehensive blood work. My insurance at the time, I don't even remember who it was, comes back and says, we don't think there's medical necessity for this blood work, so we're not going to cover it. It's $2,500 in blood work. So I get a bill for the difference, and I have to pay the difference. And so, they could come after you. It's the number one reason for bankruptcy in the state, number one reason for bankruptcy federally for individuals, number one financial concern for the state, one of the top budgetary constraints for the federal government is health insurance and healthcare costs. So, and it's all built around this monetizing chronic disease and price gouging us. And so I was left on the hook with all that money. The point of the matter is like, the blood test we run at Ways to Well today is way more comprehensive with a 45-minute consult with a clinician, and it is cheaper than what you would, if you were to go and try and bill it through the insurance, it'd be a $2,800 blood test, which is crazy.
Right.
We're doing all of it, I think, for like $400-something with a consult. And that's the whole market that they've built. It's everyone trying to make a cut off of everything that you do with your body.
Right. I think that there's just... the problem is that negotiation piece. It's like if there was no negotiation and you had a contract that said you pay us $700 for that MRI and the insurance company was on the hook for that, then you wouldn't have, like, I think when you allow for all this negotiation, whether it be like the price of your, pharmaceutical products or an MRI or a surgery, then of course, like why wouldn't they inflate that and say it's $3,000 just to get their small cut because they can negotiate for that? I mean, as a consumer, I'd much rather have transparency. I'd much rather go direct to companies like Ways to Well, where you're like, okay, I know exactly what I'm getting. I know exactly what I'm paying for. I'm paying for it out of pocket. It's funny that you're sitting here because my dad has had insurance for everything in his whole life, and he's always been a cash paid entrepreneur. He's like, walks in and he's like, what'll it be for cash? He's like exchanging.
Yeah.
He's doing trades with with his family dentist. He has they have like a mountain house. So he'll be like, Dr. Montgomery, how about a weekend in Mammoth? How about a week in Mammoth?
So funny.
He will like flip a coin. He'll like do two prices and he'll be like, well, I want to flip a coin. And everybody buys into flipping a coin with my dad. And he's like, you just got to flip a coin, babe. Like, it's crazy,
so
but it is like, why would we pay more when we could pay cash and then not have what you're explaining, which is these increase in insurance premiums? I think that my dad owned a towing company growing up, so it was always about like car wrecks and accidents and like figure out what the mechanic will do like with cash, and is there a certain time of year that he like charge you less, like when's a slow period, when does he want to like increase profits? He was always pretty like savvy when it came to all of that stuff, and I always thought he was crazy, but I mean, you just like, you're solidifying
it's hard
the
because
fact
they really do obstruct the ability to have preventative personalized medicine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, that's the other challenge. Like, if you wanted comprehensive blood work in an insurance-based model, they're going to obstruct your accessibility to that. That was the other thing I saw when I owned a blood lab, and I went out and we educated primary cares throughout the state of Texas on the importance of getting proactive and predictive. Like, why why would you wait to treat a chronic disease when we could prevent the chronic disease?
Right.
Like, don't mask the symptoms, prevent the root cause. And so we would talk about the importance, and doctors would go, yeah, it makes total sense. Yeah, how do we do it? And I'm like, well, let's pull comprehensive blood work on all of your, annual health wellness checkups.
Yeah.
And like this will give us the ability to have at least line of sight into if this person's headed towards a chronic disease. We can't treat what we refuse to acknowledge. And so we did that, and we went out and educated. And within 6 months, all of our doctors got letters from the insurance companies saying, if you continue to pull comprehensive blood work, you risk losing your insurance policy with us. And if you're a primary care or an internal medicine doctor in Texas and you lose United or Blue Cross or Cigna, you're done. Like, you can't run your practice. It's crucial to have that patient volume and patient flow. And so the clinicians are terrified.
Yeah.
And it's not that they're bad people. They came into this with the best of intentions, but they are beat down. They're exhausted. They're scared. They're terrified of the insurance companies. And frankly, they have no way to fight back.
Right.
Because most of those primary cares now work for big hospital institutions, and those big hospitals are terrified because they don't want to go into litigation against one of these big multi-hundred billion dollar insurance conglomerates, because they're worried they'll lose their reimbursements, or they'll get cut off a contract, or they'll say, you didn't collect enough copays, you owe us $25 million, or whatever the number is. And so everyone's just hiding, and every year the reimbursements get less and less. What the patient gets, the cost goes up more and more for the patient and the employer, and the insurance companies cover and give less and less care. And it's a model built for a disaster. Like, we shouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
I think it was Russell Brand who said, why are we shocked when we have terrible healthcare outcomes and amazing quarterly profits when we've built an entire ecosystem around amazing quarterly profits at the cost of poor healthcare outcomes?
Yeah.
And that's where we're at.
I mean, I'm sure you saw this when you were in pharma too. It was like, if you were with a primary care physician, they were seeing 30 patients a day, or they were trying to see 45 patients a day and looking for as many CPT codes as possible for each patient for that 5 or 10 minutes they had with them. And you're just not being listened to. They're not asking you the right questions. They're not trying to get you off medications. They're just trying to Band-Aid with a pharmaceutical product because they have a reimbursement code for that, versus being like a functional cash pay type of a physician where they can say, hey, Brigham, I'm going to sit down with you for 2 hours. We're going to talk about if you were breastfed, vaginally birthed, if you ever went out of the country, have you ever had a parasite? What's your digestion like? What is your nutrition like? What's your sleep like? And, that was really hard for me to see, because it's like, like you said, these physicians, they spend a lot of time in school and a lot of money, and there are a lot of student loans, and they're doing it to help people. They're not trying to be put in a system where they're handcuffed to this horrible backwards reimbursement system. And then you look at like a physician who is a functional MD, and for them to like pay off their loans and have a practice and pay for, the rent of their, their office space or whatever, I see sometimes it's like $1,500 to $4,000 an hour for an appointment with a functional MD. Then on top of that, you're talking about out-of-pocket comprehensive blood work that your insurance may pay for or may not pay for, but that's that's not up to them. You're paying that copay out of pocket, or the rest of, maybe you're paying it cash, and then you're supplementing on top of that. Like, what needs to change? Like, how from the CPT codes and the physicians, like, is there a workaround for them to work more like an integrative doctor, or do they have to go to cash pay? Like, how, like, what's in, like,
I mean, the solution,
how do they save their career?
I see is like, it's multifaceted, right? So one is we have to break the PBMs up and separate them from the insurance companies. And that's going to be a bear, and that's going to require a lot of focus from the federal government. But I do know those discussions are being had. Like, is there a way to shut down the PBMs and extrapolate them out from being a profit center for big insurance? Because that incentivizes big insurance. You're building the wrong reward system. You show me the reward system, and I'll show you the outcome, right? If we're rewarding monetizing chronic disease and prescription drug care and minimizing accessibility to alternative treatments and preventative care, we're going to get exactly what we're rewarding. And so if we instead reward driving metabolic health, preventing metabolic disease, preventing the cascade effect of what transpires after metabolic disease, which is all the 5 chronic diseases that are killing so many Americans, and we incentivize health care, not sick care. And the only way I see to do that today would be to build up HSAs and tax incentives for individuals to take sovereignty and autonomy over their health. We got to take it out of the hands of industry and not allow big insurance companies to dictate to patients when, what, where, and how they get treatment, and allow the patients to make that decision side by side with a clinician. That's the way that I think that we could fix this and dig out of the hole. And it's not as complicated as it sounds. It's literally just giving people the right incentives and trying to come up with a better way. But, the FDA and its cross-pollination with industry, the NIH and its cross-pollination with industry, if we could shut down those revolving doors where we allow somebody to write policy or approve policy into a marketplace and then, literally 6 months later go work for the people they were providing oversight for, that's tough.
That's a really good retirement plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all those incentives are corrupting and colluding our system and making it really murky. It shouldn't be murky. We should be incentivized to get people healthy, to prevent chronic disease, to drive health span, to reduce how many prescription drugs you're on, to do our best to keep you off prescription drugs. We should have clinicians that are at minimal educated in diet, lifestyle, and nutrition. Right now, Ozempic is like this big hot button, and people are either over here or over here. And I always am like, the truth's in the middle. It is not a miracle, be-all, end-all solution to every problem we have, but it's probably also not the devil. If utilized appropriately and discussed appropriately in the right patient population, which is a chronically ill, obese, diabetic patient, it is an amazing tool in the tool belt to improve metabolic health.
Right.
If utilized for the girl who's trying to lose 10 pounds for spring break and you prescribe it and never talk to that person, never
They're getting the highest dose.
You're not deep diving into how much lean muscle do you have, how much protein do you eat. Prescribing Ozempic without talking about diet, lifestyle, and nutrition is like brushing your teeth while eating Oreos. It's totally counterintuitive.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's a lot of what's happening because of what you just discussed. It's like, I can bill this, I can get a reimbursement, I can get this person out the door, I got them the medicine they wanted, win-win. We all win here.
Right.
But it's not. We're not winning. We're letting the system dictate to us pathways rather than us driving our own pathways.
Right. Well, and you hit the nail on the head. Like it's gonna happen at a policy level. It's gonna happen with people like you and Callie speaking up. I know you were just at the Senate, and then you were just, I believe, here in Texas doing the same type of work. Can we talk about some of your passion projects and what you're looking to see done on a government level?
Yeah. No, that'd be awesome. So the Senate stuff, the U.S. Senate was fascinating because I just got the call from Callie, and then I had been talking to Jillian Michaels and Bobby Kennedy, and we had actually just done a hike where we were just shooting content and walking through the MAHA movement, and we got the call about the opportunity to testify, and it was an array. I learned a lot because my knowledge is same as yours, like big pharma, big insurance, FDA, medical practices, the challenges there, comprehensive blood work, where are the obstructions, how come patients can't get care?
Yeah.
Like my big hot button is you're obstructing patients' accessibility to predictive, preventative, personalized medicine, and you're steering them towards chronic disease. And then you're monetizing that chronic disease and selling them drugs rather than selling them solutions.
For years.
For years and years and years.
Yeah.
But what blew my mind was hearing Vonnie and some of the food experts break down the same thing happening in the food system. I had no idea. I mean, I guess I was just in my lane. So I learned so much at that. Like there's 10,000 ingredients approved in the United States for our food. There's 300 in Europe. We used to have 300 in the 80s, and now we're at over 10,000 ingredients, including petrochemicals, leftover preservatives from our petrol facilities, like you name it. All of these extra additives that extend shelf life, but they're also endocrine system disruptors. like hearing the testimonies of Dr. Palmer
Yeah.
breaking down the
Love
mental
him.
health crisis, like deaths of despair at an all-time high. And it just triggered like PTSD of selling antidepressants. And I remembered talking to the doctor when I was getting trained on Prozac at the time and going, it doesn't really differentiate from placebo.
Yeah.
Like the placebo was 40-something%, and then the control group was like 52%.
Yeah.
And so
You're like,
now,
is this statistically significant?
yes. And now you jump forward, 20 plus years that SSRIs have been on the marketplace, these compounds that were going to save us from depression. And depression is at an all-time high. Deaths of despair, anxiety at an all-time high. Deaths of despair are greater than that of the Great Depression right now. 5% of our brain by weight is microplastics. We have the equivalent to like a table or a plastic spoon of microplastics in our brain right now. It's insane. And SSRIs have been shown in their own studies now, retrospectively over 75 studies. What they found is they barely differentiated from placebo. 85% of the benefits of an SSRI was placebo effect. And then you have all the issues of the initial onset of the SSRI, not to mention a 50% relapse rate within 18 months for even the people that it did work for. And you just look at it and go, are we better off?
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying. Like, are we better off? And are we going to continually blindly trust big pharma and these big institutions and just believe it at its face value? I don't think we can. I think we have to start questioning. And that's what I was hearing a lot of those Senate testimonies saying. Thought leaders, not the woo-woo caucus like the article tried to say. I was the least qualified there, and my talk track was just what I saw as an industry insider. I'm by no means an expert. I'm just here to tell you what I saw.
Yeah.
Like tell you where I saw a broken system, I saw obstructionist mindset, I saw the monetization of chronic disease. And it's so easy to throw a bunch of stats and talk about dollars and financials. But at the end of the day, we're talking about human lives.
Yeah.
These are people like my brother. This is mothers, daughters, sisters, brothers. These are family members, and these are people dying at breakneck speed.
Yeah.
More than every war we've ever fought worth of people are dying every year of preventable chronic diseases, and it's getting worse. But we're spending more on drugs, and the pharmaceutical companies are killing it, and the insurance companies are killing it. And my thing is, there is hope. Like the hope is in us taking sovereignty and accountability over our health and autonomy over our health. And hopefully through government regulation and change, we can fix some of these things. But in the meantime, I tell people, if you can afford it, if you have the time, the bandwidth, try to go cash pay. Try to find somebody in your area. Oftentimes it's cheaper than operating in the broken system anyway.
Right.
If you really look into it, a lot of times it's cheaper. And maybe you can't afford to go every quarter. But if you had one comprehensive blood test a year with a provider that you trust that can give you the tools to be healthy from that point forward and drive or offset chronic disease, that's worth its weight in gold.
Yeah.
Way more than getting on some, GLP-1 weight loss drug that is going to have another cascade of side effects.
Yeah. I think what we both share is that we were, we grew up, we went to college, we start our first career, we get into these big institutions, big pharma, med device, you pull back the curtain on insurance, and you realize that their questions need to be had. If there's no differentiation really between placebo and effectiveness and an SSRI, or you see the addiction levels of opioids, or you're even looking at some of the articles being published out of Yale or on Nature about side effects we're seeing now with mRNA vaccines, with COVID, what these things do is they just become this gold. It is so much money for these people that it's just going and going and going and building and building and building. And people who have never worked on the inside, they blatantly trust. They're like, oh, well, the FDA is protecting me. They're protecting me. They would never let anything bad happen. It's such a strong and hard approval process. Nothing would get through without it being fully safety tested. And the minute someone says hey, can we ask a question? Can we just can we just go back to the safety studies? Can we all get a look at those? Can we do
Yeah.
retrospective studies on this, on the health and safety of this thing that was pretty much mandated across the United States for people? Like, what's really happening under the surface? And there's this outrage around like just asking questions and
Yeah.
just seeing if there's a better way. And I just have to say, like, I appreciate so much your insight and like your work and effort into just opening people's eyes around asking questions. It doesn't mean we're anti something or things should go away,
Yeah.
but informed consent is really important and autonomy, I think, is really important for the American public. Like, that's what this country is built on. Like, the American dream, like, you know, be an entrepreneur, build your business, buy a house, have your family, raise your kids. Like, you get to make the choices. And I think, you know, that should be really looked at. And I'm really hopeful. And I'm so grateful for people like you just asking the hard questions to our government officials, to like waving the flag and saying like, hey, like, let's take a look at what the system looks like and where the incentives are, and relook at like the safety of some of these products. I'm just really grateful.
No, thank you. I'm glad you're saying that, because like a lot of the politicians I've learned, they don't know.
Well,
Right?
I have
And,
friends
like,
who don't know.
yeah.
They like, if they're not into health and nutrition and wellness, they just are
Well,
like,
even I wouldn't know if I wasn't in the industry. Like when I broke down for Rogan what's going on in the med device space,
yeah,
it's even crazier. People understand that pharmaceutical drugs, they're so safe. They went through this FDA process and blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, less than 2% of adverse events get reported.
mm-hmm.
And within like a decade of a drug being on the market, a huge percentage of those drugs end up being recalled or mandating a major label change.
Yeah.
So that's the prescription medicine side of the business. If you go to the med device side of the business, 90+% of the products that go into your body or that are utilized in the operating room have never had a human safety study. And people go, what? What do you mean? It went through the FDA? No, the FDA developed what's called the 510K approval process. It's a loophole that allows med device manufacturers to get a product into the market because, again, in the 80s, everything's changing so fast, they couldn't get to everything. They said, look, we need to create a pathway to bring products into the market that allow patient accessibility to these cutting-edge modalities. I don't doubt it was the best of intentions, probably brought on by a big med device lobby.
Mm-hmm.
But what you inadvertently did was free up a pathway to allow everything to come into the market with no sort of oversight or regulatory, body preventing it. And I saw firsthand dozens and dozens of examples of devices failing in surgical procedures, in the middle of surgery, in some of the most intense moments. I know for sure there was a camera launched into the market that was high res. And when you're in the middle of an integral part of a procedure, every time you'd hit the ablation device, the camera would turn off.
Oh my God.
And so you would lose visibility at a crucial time during a surgery. How many people could have died or maybe did die? I don't know. This was a nationwide issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I can give dozens of examples just like that. Or we go to how regulated and strict we are supposedly with prescription drugs. Like drug reps carry trunk stock.
Yeah.
That trunk stock is sitting in 110-degree Texas weather going from clinic to clinic. Same thing with surgical device. If you read like the blades that go into bodies, it says store them in these temperature parameters. Well, a rep is driving around with that in the bed of their truck.
Yeah.
Like candidly,
Yeah.
taking these products in and out of surgery. This is just the reality of it. I'm not here to tell people like this is bad or good. This is the reality though. And it is happening every day. And it is not as safe. It is not as controlled, and it is not as protected and as insulated as we would like to pretend to ourselves that it is.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see it firsthand, you start going, oh my gosh,
Right.
this is really, really bad. And I don't think our politicians understand how bad it is. And that's one of the things I'm learning. They're trying to understand, like they didn't even know what pharmacy benefit managers were. Like they really had no idea. They're like, wait, who is this? I have an insurance company. I don't have a PBM. And it's like, okay.
But you do.
Yeah, and I have to walk them through. And as I walk them through, then I've even had calls where politicians have called me and said, can you walk me through who these middlemen are again? And I systematically try to bring their awareness to it. Because if we can, again, like in chronic disease, if we can uncover the root cause, then we can truly treat the root cause and prevent the chronic disease. If we can teach the politicians the real nature of what's happening and the why, then we can hopefully arm them to begin to fight back and fix some of these broken policies and procedures is my hope. And that's kind of become like a passion project because there is an immense amount of interest and they really do, from what I've seen, they really do want to try to help, but it's an uphill battle and you got to have your facts straight and everything's met with resistance and you're fighting 1 inch at a time.
Right.
Because these big insurance companies and big pharmaceutical companies have mega lobbies and they're going to fight every move made.
Right. I mean, it makes perfect sense if you're trying to control costs for the patients and the hospitals, but make sure people are being reimbursed, but then your pocketbooks or your campaigns are being funded by these big pharmaceutical companies or insurance companies, or there's kickbacks and you add on top of those the rebates. Like it's all messy across the board.
Yeah.
And I think the empowerment that you shared earlier on the podcast is like, maybe you have your insurance if something is dire and your car is totaled, use the car example, but you pay for everything else. You negotiate yourself for a cash pay basis. That is taking the power back into your own hands. What else can people do? I want to end this podcast on a positive note for health because I have seen for years and years, patients come to functional MDs on multiple medications and pharmaceuticals, reverse those with diet and lifestyle. And I, played a part on that team of, updating their pantries, cleaning up their food, making sure that their blood sugar was balanced, watching those markers, inflammation, A1C, insulin, all the levels drop. And then you're like, wow, there's so much empowerment here. There's less inflammation. They're able to like really be strong in their bodies. Like how would you empower our listeners to not only just, obviously have your insurance, pay cash, but like what can you do proactively to get to the root cause of their own health issues and really take care of themselves?
The main thing I'll say is there is hope.
Yeah.
Like there's immense hope. Like I grew up with a diabetic dad, a diabetic mom, diabetic brothers, obesity chronically throughout my family. And I said this in front of the Texas Senate. We've been told a lie that chronic disease runs in a family. Chronic disease runs in a family. Diet, lifestyle, and behaviors run in a family. Epigenetics are the gun. Our choices and decisions are the bullets. Don't put the bullets in the gun. We can offset and beat our genetics. We really can. And like, it comes through simple choices. A lot of it is just being outside, getting sunlight, try to lift weights 3 days a week, try to make smarter choices. We're never going to be perfect. Even me, I try to eat well. And then I realize, I've been heating up my pre-planned healthy foods in plastic containers for years and probably absorbing all these microplastics. And I'm like, it's never
windshield, Brigham.
It's never going to be perfect. But it's about being better and putting wins on the board. And if you find yourself in the pit of despair, if you find yourself in a dark place, try to stop digging. Like, try to go for a walk. Try to just put a small win on the board. I hate to go back to it does help to have blood work and to know where you're at and to have a baseline because that's your measuring stick. And so if people can afford to go out and find a practice or in some instances, if they can get their insurance to cover a comprehensive blood panel and they have a good clinician that'll fight for that, just to have line of sight into your baseline. But you're never going to do any damage by trying to lift 3 days a week, walk, get into nature, control your anxiety, sleep. Like sleep's the biggest one that even really fit, athletic, CrossFit people come in and their systems are a wreck because they don't sleep.
Yeah.
We're chronically stressed, taxed, overworked, like mentally taxed to the nth degree. It's like try to find ways to decompress, try to find ways to re-engage your sleep. Those are like the little wins. Like for me, I try to get sleep. I try to make sure I sweat every day. I try to just make slightly better choices and not make, if I make a mistake one day, make up for it. Don't just go, well,
Throw in the towel.
Yeah, I ate pizza yesterday. I may as well eat
start
a
on
burger.
Monday.
Yeah. It's so easy. Tomorrow never comes.
Yeah.
And you wake up one day and it's been a year and all of a sudden you're 20 pounds heavier. And now you're going to a primary care who's trying to put you on Ozempic. And we prescribe Ozempic. I own a pharmacy that ships Ozempic. I'm not here to say it's bad. It's just not the answer to your problem. It is a tool in a long list of potential tools in a tool belt, and it should not be the primary tool.
Yeah. Those are great pieces of advice. And you did just mention that you own a pharmacy, and we haven't ever talked about traditional pharmacies versus compounding pharmacies on the podcast. I have a lot of functional MDs that do a lot of compounding, and we talked a little bit. I had a period of time after my third son where cortisol was high, circadian mismatch, lack of sleep, 3 kids, business. And my doctor was like, your thyroid is just wrecked. Like, I just need to give you a life vest for a couple of months. I need your iron levels up. I got some iron IVs. You need your nutrient status back up. And he was like, we need to wean Julian. And I was like, not yet. He's my last baby. I can't take the kid from me yet. But and just, it was pretty life-saving for me at a very low dose. And it so I would love for you to explain why you kind of moved into compounding pharmacies and like why they would be different from a traditional pharmacy, just so people have the information.
Yeah, one of the big misnomers, and it's because Big Pharma is trying to perpetuate this, and they even have the ear of the FDA, and they've released statements and intimidating comments. Every ingredient that goes to a compounding pharmacy in the United States is sourced from an API, meaning an ingredient wholesaler, that is the same wholesaler that sells to the big pharmaceutical institutions. So you have to have FDA-approved ingredients. Then you run them through your process, which you have quality teams, quality control teams, sterile room. Everything's inspected by the FDA and the state pharmacy board. And then every single compound is sent off and independently third-party verified to show that it's exactly what it is. So the ingredients are what they're supposed to be. Then you mix and compound the medication. Then you send it off to independently third-party verify that it is what you said it was. And from there, it's released into the marketplace. So compounding pharmacies are not the Wild West. They're extremely safe. In fact, most of the medications on a hospital crash cart come from compounding pharmacies because big pharmaceutical companies don't want to make those products because there's not a lot of profit in them.
Yeah.
So a compounding pharmacy is essentially another solution, another tool in your tool belt to allow you accessibility to customized medications, maybe a unique dosage of a medication, but then also quality, efficacious medications for a fraction of the cost of the big pharma insurance model. And so when I launched ours, it was originally in an effort to provide non-addictive, non-abusive pain creams, and then it evolved into everything else that we're doing. And so today it's like peptides, hormone optimization, HCG, the fertility medication, basically fertility, anything in the gaps is what I call it. Anything that the insurance companies are either price gouging people on, or big pharma isn't making, or big pharma is price gouging people on. That we can compound and make, or if a patient needs a unique blend to their, genetic makeup, and they may be a slow, fast, or moderate metabolizer, or be at increased risk of adverse event, we can tailor that compound and allow them a little more specificity and personalized medicine.
I love it because
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's bio-individuality from a pharmacy level, which is like from a pharmacist, which is awesome. And I know that a lot of my MDs will use a compounding pharmacy for all of the peptides that they're using and things that just aren't mainstream yet, other than Ozempic, which is really, really helpful. So
yeah.
Thank you for that little 101. I think that also is really helpful.
It's been very confusing because I will say, even during the Super Bowl, Hims and Hers did an ad.
Yeah.
And it was about their telemedicine company and pushing Ozempic. And it created an opportunity for Big Pharma to go after compounding pharmacies. And they tried to portray it to the government as, look at this, you guys don't you want to control our advertising, but you're letting these compounding pharmacies advertise. Nothing has ever happened like that before in the history of America. So to see that ad was kind of jarring. But it's like perplexing because it's like, it's not a good look. And it was them pushing a product no different than Big Pharma.
Yeah.
And it was misleading to what compounding pharmacies are. And it unfortunately created a lot of backlash from the government and from Big Pharma. And it did, in a way, put a bullseye on compounding pharmacies. But it's like, that is not what most compounding pharmacies in America are or are about.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that hasn't been my experience. I'm like really grateful for the compounding pharmacy that I have. So, okay, well, we will put your Ways to Well, your compounding pharmacy, all the things that you're doing with the Senate in our show notes today. And I just thank you for pulling back the curtain. Thank you for walking people through why all of their insurance costs and premiums go up, why their healthcare is so expensive, why the prices for pharmaceuticals are so expensive, how Big Pharma like gets around patent, a drug going off patent, and how they can continue to perpetuate sort of like their money train. And what we, gives us, it allows us for us to be creative and think about all the ways that we can kind of dismantle this very broken system. I'm so happy to be your megaphone here, and I really appreciate your time,
thank
Brigham.
you. Thank you for having me on. And the future's bright. Like, it starts with us having the conversation. And so thank you for spreading the message. Thank you to your listeners. And I really do believe the future's bright. I think that we're going to fix a lot of these things. And the fact we're looking at the root cause gives me a lot of optimism. It starts with the dialogue, and we're way past dialogue at this point to action. And so let's see what the future holds. Let's see how this shakes out.
I'm so hopeful. I really am just like, we have to be allowed to ask questions, because then we can really make change. Where can people follow along? Where can they learn about Ways to Well and you and all your other amazing appearances on
we're trying to Ways, the number 2 well.com is the website. And then that's also our Instagram. And then on X, it's just my first name, Brigham Buhler for Instagram. Sorry. And then on X, I think it's Ferris Bueller 81.
Yeah.
But I'm really just posting about the governmental stuff right now for the most part on my personal stuff.
Yeah. It's been fun to follow.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it.
It's been a wild ride.
Yeah. It has been crazy. I'm like, what? Oh, this is happening.
So better days ahead.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Be Well by Kelly LeVeque podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving a review in your favorite podcast app and subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. We're also excited to share that full-length video episodes are now on YouTube and Spotify, so you can watch along as you listen. The best way to support me and the show is by sharing it with your friends and family. Your recommendations make all the difference. This is a Wellness Loud production produced by Drake Peterson, Chantilly Toison, and Cass Falding. The video is recorded by Luke Rodriguez and edited by Jesse Trout. Sound mixing is by Mike Fry. See you next time.